Maybe it's not about how much you earn. Maybe it's about what you're still trying to prove with it. You tell yourself it's security or ambition, but deep down, it's that small voice whispering, "I'll feel enough when I finally have more." And yet, no matter how much comes in, the worry never leaves. The numbers change. The fear doesn't. Because money isn't just currency. It's emotion wearing math. In Mind Over Money by Claudia Hammond, that truth hits quietly. It shows how your beliefs, not your balance, decide your freedom. And once you see that, you can't unsee it. Because peace with money was never about money at all. So, let's begin. Chapter 1. The Money Story. We grow up inside. It's strange how no one really teaches us about money. Not really. They teach us how to count it, how to save it, how to chase it. But not what it means. By the time we're adults, we're already living inside an invisible script. One that began long before we ever earned our first dollar. You didn't choose your first money story. It was handed to you. In the background, at the dinner table, at the grocery store, in the quiet arguments you overheard between adults. Somewhere between your father's silence after opening a bill and your mother's small smile when something was on sale, you began learning how money feels, not just what it does. Some people grew up in houses where money was like oxygen, always there, rarely talked about. Others grew up where it was the ghost in the room, the thing that decided everything. Where you lived, how you dressed, whether you were allowed to dream big or had to stay realistic. And somehow, all those little moments, the tight grocery budgets, the guilt after buying something for yourself, the pride in fixing something instead of replacing it, they stitch together the emotional DNA of how you treat money today. You might not even notice it, but those old stories are still driving. They whisper things like, "You shouldn't spend too much on yourself," or "If you don't save, you'll lose everything," or sometimes even worse, "You'll never have enough." It's wild, isn't it? You can earn 6 figures and still feel broke. You can finally afford comfort, but still feel that small panic every time the card machine takes a second too long to beep. Because the numbers changed, but the story didn't. Money doesn't start in the wallet. It starts in the nervous system. When you grew up watching someone flinch at bills, you learned that safety is fragile. When you saw someone give freely, even when they didn't have much, you learned that abundance isn't always about having. Sometimes it's about trusting. There's a moment I still remember. A friend once told me about his mother. She worked double shifts and saved every penny. When he got his first job, he took her out for dinner. A simple place, nothing fancy. But when the bill came, she hesitated. She said, "You don't need to spend money on me, I'm fine." He said it wasn't about the money. It was about showing gratitude. And she smiled. But her eyes said she didn't know how to receive that. That's what early scripts do. They don't just shape how we earn, they shape how we receive too. Some families teach you that money is control, that whoever holds it holds power. Others teach you it's dirty or dangerous or unspiritual. And some teach you it's love. The way you prove you care, the way you say sorry, the way you stay connected. So even in adulthood, every time you swipe your card, some part of you is trying to feel safe, or loved, or free. It's almost funny. How much of our financial behavior is emotional camouflage? We call it responsible budgeting, but sometimes it's just fear in a suit. We call it treating myself, but sometimes it's loneliness disguised as self-care. We call it investing, but sometimes it's just a need to win the game we were never invited to play as kids. At some point, you start realizing the money problems you have as an adult rarely start with money. They start with emotion, with what you were taught to fear, to chase, to avoid. Money is logical, but our relationship with it rarely is. When Claudia Hammond talks about this in Mind Over Money, she's not preaching financial advice. She's revealing a mirror. She shows how our childhood, our culture, our environment, they all mix into a unique emotional formula that quietly decides what enough means to us. And most of us never rewrite it. You see, awareness doesn't erase the past, but it loosens its grip. When you start seeing that your scarcity mindset isn't your fault, it's your inheritance, you begin to breathe differently. When you realize your guilt for spending isn't moral, it's emotional conditioning, you start to heal. And healing doesn't mean you suddenly start spending freely. It means you finally stop fighting with yourself every time you do. Here's the quiet truth. Most of us don't want to be rich. We just want to stop feeling afraid of losing, of not keeping up, of disappointing someone. We want peace, but we've confused peace with control. And that's the great irony of money. The tighter you hold it, the smaller your world becomes. Because when everything is about protecting, you forget how to live. Sometimes, rewriting your money story isn't about changing habits. It's about asking softer questions, like, what did my parents teach me without words? Or, when did money first make me feel ashamed? Or even, what would security feel like if it wasn't tied to numbers? These questions don't give quick answers, but they open something that's been closed for years. The possibility that your financial life can feel different, not just look different. Because here's what no one tells you. Money doesn't respond to fear very well. It listens better to respect. When you treat it like a partner, not a master, not a savior, it begins to flow more naturally. Not because the world changes, but because you stop resisting yourself. So maybe that's where it starts. Not with the next paycheck or the next spreadsheet, but with one honest moment of awareness. A small pause before you buy something, save something, or judge yourself for either. A pause that says, I see the story. I know where it came from, but I don't have to keep living it. That's the first act of financial freedom, not earning more, but understanding what's been quietly earning space inside you all along. Chapter 2. How the Mind Labels and Touches Money. There's this quiet illusion we all live inside. The idea that money is neutral, that it's just math, numbers in, numbers out. But if that were true, then logic alone would make us rich, calm, and content. And yet, even the smartest people who can solve complex problems, end up making choices with money that make no sense on paper. Because our brains don't see money as one thing, they see it as many. Think about it. You'd spend $50 differently depending on where it came from. A bonus feels different than your salary. Gift money feels lighter than savings. Cash in your hand feels more spendable than numbers glowing on a screen. Same value, completely different emotion. That's what psychologists call mental accounting. It's how we divide money into imaginary boxes: rent, fun, travel, emergency. And then treat each box by a different set of emotional rules. We tell ourselves it's about discipline, but deep down, it's about identity. Each category represents a version of us: the responsible one, the free one, the anxious one, the dreamer. And we do this without realizing it. When we say, I shouldn't use savings for that, we're not protecting money. We're protecting a self-image. We're saying, I'm not the kind of person who touches that box. Money isn't just labeled in our heads. It's textured in our senses. It's strange how physical it still feels. The swipe of a card, the rustle of bills, the sound of coins falling into a jar. All of it carries emotion. There's research showing people spend less when using cash than cards. Not because of discipline, but because cash hurts to part with. The pain of payment is real, measurable in the brain. And digital money, it numbs that pain. You don't spend online, you just click. And that one-click distance changes everything. I once met someone who said she loved using cash because she could see it leaving her hand. She said it kept her honest. But another friend said cash made him anxious. He hated watching his wallet shrink. For him, digital spending felt safe because he didn't have to face it. Two people, same tool, opposite emotion. That's how personal money is. It's a mirror that shows what you'd rather not see. The funny thing is, our minds also attach feelings to the form of money. People are more likely to spend crumpled bills than crisp ones. They'll use small notes faster than big ones, and they'll tip more with shiny coins than dull ones. We think we're rational, but the brain is quietly making aesthetic decisions about value. And then there's the illusion of found money. The $5 you find in your jeans feels like a gift, so you spend it fast. It's not real money in your head. That's why tax refunds vanish quicker than paychecks. It's the same amount, but emotionally, it's free money. And free money has wings. Claudia Hammond writes about how our mental labeling shapes not just spending, but also guilt. We can donate generously to charity, but feel bad about buying a $5 latte. We can tip a stranger easily, but hesitate to buy something small for ourselves. Because the story attached to each act is different. One feels noble, the other feels indulgent. But the money doesn't care. Only we do. There's a quiet trap hidden here. The more categories we create, the less flexible we become. We start obeying invisible rules that no one wrote. I can't use savings for travel. I can't invest until I make more. I'll treat myself after I hit that target. And slowly, money stops being a tool. It becomes a cage made of emotional accounting. Sometimes the healthiest thing you can do for your financial life isn't earning more. It's relabeling what you already have. It's asking, why do I treat a dollar differently just because it came from a bonus instead of a paycheck? Why do I feel guilty spending on rest, but not on stress? Why does buying time, like hiring help or taking a break, feel wasteful, but buying objects feels justified? These aren't financial questions, they're emotional ones. And maybe that's the deeper truth. Money itself doesn't change behavior. The story we attach to it does. When you swipe a card, you're not spending digits. You're expressing belief. Belief in what's worth it. Belief in what's safe. Belief in what you deserve. That's why some people save every cent but never feel secure. Because security was never about the balance. It was about the belief that they're allowed to rest. And that's why some people spend freely but never feel free. Because freedom isn't a transaction. It's a mindset. The way we label money is the way we label ourselves. Some of us live inside, I can't afford to relax. Others inside, I deserve it because I worked hard. Both are stories trying to justify emotion with arithmetic. Maybe the real work isn't learning new math. It's unlearning the old metaphors. Seeing that money isn't a villain or a savior. It's a mirror. One that reflects what we value, what we fear, and what we think we're worth. So the next time you hesitate before spending or feel proud of saving or guilty for enjoying, pause. Not to judge, but to notice. Because that pause is where the label starts to fade, and underneath all those labels, there's just energy. A simple exchange between your effort and your experience. And when you finally see money that way, as energy, not identity, you start to touch it differently, more gently, more consciously. And somehow, that simple shift changes everything. Chapter 3: Ownership, Price Illusions, and Small Sums. We like to think we're good at judging value. That when we buy something, we're making a clean, rational decision. But the truth is, value isn't measured in numbers. It's shaped by emotion, especially when it comes to what we already own. Ever tried to sell something you loved? Maybe an old guitar or your first car. You looked up its market value, but somehow it always felt worth more. You tell yourself someone out there will see what it's really worth, but they don't. They just see an object, not the years of stories attached to it. That's the endowment effect. Our tendency to overvalue what's ours simply because it's ours. Ownership changes perception. The moment something belongs to us, it stops being neutral. It becomes a part of our identity, an extension of self. Lose it, and it feels like losing a piece of who we are. Marketers know this. That's why test drives work. That's why free trials exist. Once you try something, once you start imagining it as yours, your brain has already begun building emotional attachment. Even the idea of losing it feels wrong. That's not marketing, that's psychology. I remember a friend trying to cancel a subscription he barely used. He said, "It's only $10 a month, I'll keep it." $10 for what? For not feeling like he lost something. Ownership is powerful that way. It can make even waste feel justified. And then there's the trick of the first price. The first number you see anchors everything after it. If a jacket says $300 but is on sale for $180, it suddenly feels like a bargain, even if you'd never pay $300 in the first place. That's anchoring. Your brain using the first number as a reference point for value, even when it's meaningless. It's why deals feel so good. Not because we saved money, but because we beat something, a system, a price, an illusion. But it's still an illusion. You're not saving $120. You're spending $180. Yet your mind celebrates like it won a prize. Claudia Hammond explains this with such clarity. How our sense of gain in a loss isn't logical. It's emotional arithmetic. Losing $10 feels worse than finding $10 feels good. That's why discounts, coupons, and exclusive offers work. They make us feel we're escaping a loss, and our brains would rather avoid loss than gain value. Even small numbers can bend our logic. Think about loose change. A few coins in your pocket or a few dollars left in an app wallet. Too small to matter, right? But those small sums aren't invisible. They quietly shape behavior. That spare $5 is why you add an unnecessary item to get free shipping. That leftover credit is why you buy something you don't need, just to zero it out. Tiny amounts nudge big decisions. We treat them casually, yet they steer more of our behavior than we'd ever admit. Because small feels safe, harmless, not serious enough to worry about. But small decisions are where habits live. And habits, over time, build empires or debts. The illusion of smallness protects us from guilt. It's easier to justify a $4 coffee than a $400 gadget. But buy that coffee every day, and the total creeps up quietly, invisible, unthreatening, unstoppable. We don't notice small leaks until the tank feels empty. And here's the strange part. When we lose a large amount, say $500, we feel shock, maybe anger, but lose $5 10 times and it barely registers. Our brains don't add pain the way spreadsheets add numbers. They weigh emotion, not math. Ownership, price, small sums, they all tap into one deep thing, identity. We protect what's ours. We justify what we've bought. We chase the feeling of getting a deal because it says something about us, that we're smart, careful, or lucky. But beneath it all, what we really crave is emotional balance. We want to feel like our choices make sense, that we're not foolish or impulsive or careless. That's why we invent stories around our spending. I got it on sale. I might use it later. It was an investment. Sometimes those stories are harmless. Sometimes they're traps. There's a quiet power in noticing when a story starts forming in your mind. When you hear yourself justifying a purchase, pause. Ask what emotion you're protecting, because once you see the illusion, it loses power. And maybe that's the deeper point. Value isn't out there in the price tag. It's in here, in the feeling we're chasing. Sometimes it's comfort, sometimes pride, sometimes just the soft relief of control. A woman once told me she kept a drawer full of old gadgets she couldn't sell. She said, "They're useless, but I can't throw them away. They remind me of the person I was when I bought them. Someone excited, hopeful." And maybe that's what ownership really is. Not about possession, but memory. So much of what we hold on to isn't about things. It's about the stories we once believed. And learning to let go, to detach value from memory, might be the real skill money asks of us. Because when you stop needing everything to be worth it, you start making choices that actually are. Chapter 4. Incentives, Fairness, and the Pull of More. There's a quiet lie hidden in almost every workplace. The idea that money is the best motivator. That if you just pay people more, they'll do more. Work harder, care deeper. But money can't buy meaning. It can only rent it for a while. We've been conditioned to chase numbers as proof of worth. The promotion, the raise, the bonus, they're supposed to feel like progress. But progress without peace quickly becomes pressure. And pressure, disguised as success, is the most common burnout story of our time. Here's the strange thing. When you start earning more, you don't necessarily feel richer. You just move the finish line. The mind adjusts, resets its expectations, and quietly whispers, "Okay, now what's next?" That whisper never stops. We call it ambition, but sometimes it's just fear wearing nice shoes. Money as an incentive works only up to a point. After that, the relationship flips. More can distort behavior instead of inspiring it. You start optimizing for reward, not purpose, for output, not meaning. And slowly, work turns from something you give into something you trade. Claudia Hammond explains it well. How pay doesn't just influence what we do, but how we feel about doing it. When rewards are too obvious, they crowd out the quiet satisfaction of effort. That sense of, "I did this because it mattered." And once that inner fire dims, no bonus can relight it. I remember someone who worked in sales. Every quarter was a race. She'd hit her target, celebrate for a weekend, and then start over. The joy lasted 48 hours. The pressure lasted 3 months. She said, "I don't even know what winning means anymore. I just don't want to lose." That's what the culture of more does. It rewires your brain to chase the next high, not because you need it, but because you've forgotten who you were without it. And yet, the pursuit of fairness, that's a different story. Money isn't just about motivation, it's about justice. If you've ever found out that someone earns more for the same work, you know that sting. It's not jealousy, it's something deeper. It's the feeling that your effort wasn't seen. Fairness runs deeper than paychecks. It's a primal need. We'd rather earn less in a fair system than more in a crooked one. Because fairness isn't about equality, it's about dignity. Even monkeys understand it. In a famous experiment, 2 monkeys were given the same task. The first was rewarded with a slice of cucumber, the second with a grape. When the first monkey saw the other get the grape, it threw the cucumber back in outrage. It didn't want more. It wanted fair. Humans aren't that different. The moment fairness breaks, motivation cracks. You start doing the bare minimum, not because you've become lazy, but because the emotional contract has been broken. Work stops being a contribution. It becomes survival. And then there's the modern obsession with more. More salary, more followers, more stuff. We confuse abundance with accumulation. But the truth is, more isn't a number. It's a moving target shaped by comparison. You can't ever arrive at enough when your reference point keeps changing. A man once told me, "When I finally started making real money, I thought I'd feel free. Instead, I felt like I had more to lose." That's the trap of more. It doesn't end with contentment. It ends with anxiety disguised as ambition. We live in a culture that celebrates excess and disguises exhaustion as achievement, where people grind for things they don't even like, just to prove they belong. And when they finally pause, the silence feels unbearable. Because without the chase, they don't know who they are. But incentives aren't the enemy. They're just tools, amplifiers of whatever already exists in us. If you love what you do, money can help you sustain it. If you hate what you do, money will only make you tolerate it longer. The difference lies in what drives you. Do you work for recognition or for resonance? Do you chase more or do you build enough? Fairness and meaning. Those are the currencies that last. They don't inflate with markets, and they don't vanish when paychecks pause. They live in the quiet pride of contribution, the invisible joy of doing something that matters even when no one is watching. Maybe that's what the book tries to remind us. That the psychology of money isn't just about what motivates us, but what moves us. That we crave justice as much as we crave reward. And that sometimes, the richest feeling in the world isn't more pay, it's being valued. At some point, you start realizing the pull of more doesn't come from the world outside. It comes from the noise inside. The one that keeps saying, if I had a little more, I'd finally relax. But peace doesn't arrive after more. It arrives after enough. And maybe enough isn't a number. Maybe it's a feeling. One that begins when the chase finally ends, and you remember that your worth was never meant to be measured in digits, but in depth. Chapter 5. Scarcity, Morality, and Money Well Spent. There's a strange silence that follows scarcity. You feel it in the pause before checking your bank app, in the hesitation before saying yes to dinner plans, in that tiny ache that whispers, maybe later. Scarcity isn't just about numbers. It's about space in your mind. When you don't have enough, or even when you think you don't, your world shrinks. Every choice becomes a trade-off. Every joy has a price tag. And the problem isn't that you stop spending money. It's that you stop spending attention. Claudia Hammond explains it beautifully. How scarcity doesn't just limit our wallet. It limits our thinking. It traps us in short-term survival, in what she calls tunnel vision. You start making smaller, faster decisions. Not because you're careless, but because you're tired. And tired people don't plan for the future. They just try to survive the week. But scarcity doesn't only come from lack. Sometimes it's born from fear. The fear of losing what you have. That fear lives deep, like an echo from childhood, and it turns money into morality. We start labeling it. Good money, bad money, clean, dirty, deserved, undeserved. You've probably felt it. That guilt after buying something just for pleasure. The hesitation before saying no to a friend in need. The pride after donating. Or the quiet shame of not being able to. We don't just spend with our hands. We spend with our conscience. Money becomes emotional proof of who we think we are. Generous, selfish, disciplined, careless. But here's the quiet truth. Money itself doesn't have a moral. It's us who paint it with our values. When we treat money as good, only when it's earned hard, we glorify struggle. When we treat it as bad, when spent on ourselves, we mistake joy for sin. And when we think wealth corrupts, we forget that generosity needs fuel. There's a story about a man who always refused help. He'd say, I don't take charity, I earn my keep. But when his daughter fell ill, his community raised funds for him. He cried, not because he was grateful, but because he felt ashamed. He said, I didn't deserve this. That's what scarcity does. It doesn't just empty your pockets, it empties your permission to receive. Maybe the real healing starts when you stop attaching worth to pain, when you allow abundance to exist without guilt. Because money, in its healthiest form, is energy that moves. It's meant to flow through you, not around you. When it sits too long in fear, it stagnates. When it moves with intention, it creates peace. And that's where morality finds its balance, not in sacrifice, but in awareness. You can spend on joy and still live with integrity. You can build wealth and still be kind. You can give freely without emptying yourself. Generosity doesn't start with money. It starts with safety. When you feel safe, you give differently. Not from guilt, but from grace. So what does it mean to spend well? It's not about buying what's cheapest or hoarding what's safest. It's about aligning money with meaning. Paying for what truly adds peace, not just pleasure. Investing in things that make you feel more human, not more successful. Because the return on that kind of spending isn't in digits, it's in calm. Maybe that's what we've been missing all along. The understanding that enough isn't the same as everything. That contentment doesn't arrive when the balance grows. It arrives when the noise inside quiets. And when you start using money not as proof, but as a tool, you begin to feel something rare, steadiness. That quiet confidence that you can handle what comes, that you can give without fear, rest without guilt, and say no without apology. Because money well spent isn't just about spending wisely. It's about living wisely. It's about choosing experiences that make you gentler, and saving in ways that make you freer. It's about releasing the old belief that worth must always be earned in pain. At some point, you stop asking, "How much can I afford?" and start asking, "What's truly worth it?" That's the shift. That's financial maturity, not control, but clarity. And when you reach that place, something beautiful happens. You start trusting yourself again. Not your salary, not your luck, yourself. You realize you've always been the source, not the sum. Funny, isn't it? We spend our lives chasing money for freedom, and then spend that freedom worrying about money. Maybe the real goal isn't more wealth. It's a calmer relationship with it. Because the peace you're looking for isn't hiding in your bank balance. It's waiting behind your beliefs. So before you move on to your next plan, your next target, your next someday, pause for a second. Ask yourself, what would enough feel like right now? Not someday, not later. Now. If that question stirred something in you, sit with it. Let it linger a little, because that's where the real work begins. Not in numbers, but in noticing. And if this summary spoke to you, stay close. There are more quiet truths to explore, more ways to untangle the noise around money, and maybe, just maybe, to make peace with it. Take a breath, think about your own money story, and tell me, what part of it are you finally ready to rewrite? And hey, if you want to keep walking this path with me, you know where to find me next time. No rush. Just come back when your heart says, yeah, I need to hear more like this.